As you've heard, the conflict in Yemen has sometimes been labelled as a foreign conflict, and I want to pay tribute to the member for Leicester East who mentioned earlier on when he made a comment that not in this House, and also for that reason I'd like to congratulate and pay tribute to both the members for Liverpool, West Derby and Warwick and Leamington for the excellent contributions to this debate, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, and also for ensuring that instead this Parliament and all of us here have a chance to keep this issue at the forefront of public debate, and to remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, to remember those killed and injured as a result of this ongoing violence, to remember those who are starving or stricken with illness as a result of breakdown of civil society, and to remember the UK has a central role to play in the Middle East, and indeed the role it has played in this conflict. It is our moral and civic duty, and also in our best pragmatic strategic self-interest, to do all we can to help end this conflict and bring peace to Yemen. I think we have consensus across the Chamber that that is indeed what everybody does want to happen. First and foremost, because humanitarian suffering in the country has now reached a horrifying tipping point. I was grateful this week to have the opportunity of hosting a presentation by a range of aid organisations who set out the scale and scope of the human suffering we're now seeing on the Yemeni population. We were warned by Oxfam, Christian Aid and the Yemen Safe Passage Group that the dangers of famine in the country are now very real indeed. Yes, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She mentions Oxfam, and I've been contacted by a number of constituents in support of Oxfam's Red Line for Yemen campaign. Will she join me in welcoming that campaign and support its call for the government to uphold the spirit of the Arms Trade Treaty and end any illegal arms sales which could be used to cause further suffering in Yemen?
I'm very grateful to my friend for his intervention and indeed raising the awareness of that campaign, and I hope after something awareness has been raised just now that many more people will sign up to it. Because even before this conflict, Yemen was reliant on external imports of around 90 to 95% of its food. By October 2016, the combined efforts of a blockade of ports by coalition forces and severe damage to roads and port facilities has meant that imported food covered only 40% of demand. Oxfam, I would ordinarily give way, but the honourable gentleman has had 15 minutes to make his speech now, and I really want to make sure the Minister can answer the very important questions we've all posed to him. Please forgive me. Oxfam has stated that if the plunging trends of food imports continue unabated, in 4 months food imports will come to a complete halt. And add to this the spiralling economic problems now facing a country where the central bank has stopped salary payments to government employees, as well as pension payments to the elderly and welfare payments to the vulnerable. A human tragedy on almost epic scale is upon us. The estimate of these experts is that by April or May of this year, there is a high likelihood of what they called a cataclysmic famine, which would condemn millions, Madam Deputy Speaker, to suffering and death. But it's important we must bear in mind that these civilian victims are not a byproduct of the conflict. They are the target of military action, where the lack of food is being used as a weapon of war. And we have a moral responsibility to our fellow human beings to act to address this crisis now. And that's why I welcome the work being carried out by aid organisations in the Yemen, who have ensured as best as they possibly can aid is delivered to those who need it now. And I recognise that the UK Government has contributed over £100 million worth of aid to the country, while the Scottish Government has also made donations to the ongoing Disaster Emergency Committee's Yemen Crisis Appeal. But our charity alone will not avert this tragedy. What the people of Yemen need now, as much as they need food, is international leadership. And I want to welcome the efforts of the outgoing US Secretary of State, who tried to broker a ceasefire deal at the end of last year. But what we do know is that the incoming Trump administration is unlikely to take the same view of its relations in the region. And I fear that the policies of the new White House administration will instigate a worrying degree of further instability in the Middle East, a point also made by the member for Portsmouth South in this debate. That is why... Yes, I will.
I'm most grateful, the Honourable Lady. A very brief introduction. Because of the vacuum that has been created, obviously with the new administration, Britain holds the pen, as we are told, at the Security Council. There is nothing to stop us hosting a conference that will try and bring all the sides together, as well as tabling the resolution, because it will be several months before the new American administration will take office and get into the right positions. And of course they may take a different view to the Obama administration.
Very grateful to the Member of Leicester for his comments, and indeed, absolutely, and that's a demonstration of how we can show international leadership on this issue. And I know that the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State has already been very, very active indeed in this area, but we need to build on his efforts to date. We should do so not just because of the humanitarian crisis, because it also makes strategic sense in helping to combat the bastions of al-Qaeda terrorism on the Gulf of Aden, while de-escalating the tensions caused by what the Foreign Secretary himself called a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But before we take on the role of peace broker, we have to face up to our role in the conflict now. Because if Saudi Arabia and Iran are, in the Foreign Secretary's words, the puppeteers in the conflict, the UK too has often acted as its quartermaster. This must end now. The UK has exported £3.3 billion of military equipment to Saudi Arabia since 2015. And if we are to be an honest, impartial broker in this conflict, this government must immediately suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia and facilitate a full, independent, UN-led inquiry into Saudi Arabia's conduct in the war in Yemen. This has to happen because we also now know that after consistently failing to live up to our moral and legal responsibilities about the use of the now banned cluster munitions manufactured and exported from the UK to Saudi Arabia, the current approach to arms sales has failed in the case of Yemen, and the Yemeni people are the innocent victims. This government must show the leadership as that shown by the Netherlands and Germany and suspend licences for arms exports to Saudi Arabia. More specifically, at the end of last year, the US government, as has already been alluded to by the member, my friend for East Lothian, the US government banned the sale of guided munitions kits to Saudi Arabia. I'd like to ask the Minister today if he could clarify whether the UK government has granted export licence for any similar weapons to Saudi Arabia manufactured here in the UK, and would it be happy to do so in the future? In addition, rather than relying on the Saudis to dispose of these weapons themselves, ministers should demand that these weapons are turned over to our personnel for disposal. Is it not our own legal obligation as signatories to the Cluster Munitions Convention to do everything we possibly can to prevent their use? Decommissioning them ourselves would serve this responsibility. Will ministers pledge to do so today? Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, in order to be the honest broker I referred to that the region so desperately needs, we need to be clear about the involvement of UK forces on the ground in Saudi Arabia. When it published its report in September, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee recommended that the UK government answer the following questions. How many UK personnel are assisting the Saudi Arabian Armed Forces and in what roles, including BAE Systems employees? What is the extent of the involvement of each group of the UK personnel with the Saudis' operations in the Yemen? And how are the UK personnel advising the Saudi Arabian Armed Forces on international humanitarian law? And what level of understanding do they have of the coalition's regard for international humanitarian law and its operations in the Yemen? These answers should be forthcoming now. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government, I believe, has an opportunity. It has an opportunity to show international leadership. It has an opportunity to use our own power and influence in the Middle East to stop violence and not sell more weapons. And it has an opportunity to end suffering, the suffering of millions of Yemeni men, women and children. But in order to do this, it must come clean with this House and with the country about our involvement to date and the actions it's taking to put things right. And then, truly then, it can begin to play its part in consigning this forgotten conflict to history where it belongs.